Okay, we're here with our third episode, yes, of Optimist Urbanist.
Optimist Urbanist.
Yes, and today we're going to be discussing some tourism and just kind of what tourism impacts on a city. Thinking kind of into the other side of it, where it's the life of people in the city that's main economic driver is tourism, and not just being a tourist yourself. Though we will talk about some experiences we've had being tourists ourselves, because I know we've both been a lot of places, particularly around the US and in the Sun Belt, which is kind of our main focus of this podcast. So yeah. Um we can we can start off. I don't know, you want to start off with some cool places? What makes a place cool? What makes a place cool to visit? What do you think? What do you look for when you want to go somewhere?
Whenever I look for a new place to visit, I always look at where I can go, generally a downtown area or a place with the neighborhood feel that really captures the essence of a place, maybe the history. The history, it's usually an older area. I'm not going to be going to any lifestyle centers on the freeway if I'm going to go visit a city. Like I'm not
Right.
going to go visit you know, the pavilion shops or whatever
Yeah, right.
at the outlet mall, whatever.
Yeah. I know that it's funny. I always talk about childhood stuff. When I go back and listen to our episodes, I'm always like, here's me talking about being a kid again. When I was a kid, there was absolutely a thing that we did where we would drive out to go to outlet malls and, you know,
Right.
things of that nature. And it's like, as an adult now, I'm like, man, what a waste of time. But I mean, I guess my dad was trying to save a buck on some Nike shoes for me or something, right? So we gotta go to the Nike outlet. But as an adult without kids now, it's like the last thing I would ever do is like go do tourism in an outlet mall. And especially if I was visiting a new place. If I'm visiting a new place, do I want to go to a freaking store? Like a big box store? No. But will I check out a cool little main street?
Yeah.
Of course I will. My that brings me to one. So if you've ever been to White Sands National Park, it is very close to this town, Alamogordo, New Mexico,
Right.
which I actually asked some of the park ranger people or even just some of the people working in the shops because White Sands was pretty recently upgraded from national monument to national park, which does matter. Like there's like kind of a level of honor there. Obviously the area didn't change really to my knowledge. Like, White Sands has been there forever and stuff. Like that's always just been there. So but it was upgraded from national monument to national park. And I asked some of the locals in this one shop, I was like, how much has this town changed since I think 2019? When they upgraded it, and they said that they have been getting a lot more tourists since it went from national monument to national park, because I guess there's people out there who say, oh, I got to go to every national park, and they don't really care about going to all the monuments and sites and everything, because if you go to every national park, there's like 67 or something. But if you try to go to every single park unit with the sites, the monuments, the recreation areas, all those little national park units, it's like 400 something. So it's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of unattainable. So I guess national monuments are frequented more by local people, but national parks you get draw from
Mhm.
all over the place. And I mean, for a long time when I was younger, I didn't even know that there was anything other than just a national park that the Department of the Interior controlled. Like I didn't know what a national monument really was.
Right.
Even though I grew up very close to Valley Forge,
It's a national
Pennsylvania,
monument.
which is a national historic park,
Oh,
I think
okay.
it's called. Yeah. And then like Independence Hall in Philadelphia is like a national historic park,
Huh.
but not a national park. Like it's all these like weird jurisdictional things that the National Park Service does. It's pretty complicated, but yeah, there is the thing that everybody thinks of, just like national park, like Yosemite and the Grand Canyon and all that. Those get the most visitors, whereas the other things, even something like Independence Hall, it's way less.
Yeah.
You know, um, but still important, obviously. So the point is that this town, Alamogordo in New Mexico, I visited it and everything, and I think that given that we live in the Sun Belt, I would have gone out there even if it was just national monument but the fact that it was upgraded to national park definitely drew me in as well. So there's
Hmm.
all that factor as well. Like, what's this thing called? Like, is it on this national scale of honor?
Right.
And we'll get to that, how that applies to cities as well, and not just parks. But in the town of Alamogordo, I visited some very cute shops on their little main street,
Hmm.
and there certainly were some areas of the town that were less desirable, but they had a very kind of just cute little shopping area. And it's like, all right, are you looking it up?
Yeah, I'm looking at Almagor.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, this is like nice, it's a nice little quaint town. Would not have rolled through here any other way other than just visiting a national park. So they're very fortunate in that way to have that to generate their economy. But living there is probably way different. You have your national park there, and then like that's that's kind of it. I mean, they also they on the highways, if anyone listening is familiar with this, on the highways going I-10 east, kind of in southern Arizona and in New Mexico,
Hmm.
you see signs for pistachio land in Alamogordo for like
Oh,
300 miles.
wow.
They have a big pistachio farm out there, but something like that is just like so niche. Like you're not going to draw anyone in other than someone going across the country or just driving out there to go and visit. Like you're not going to get somebody from Pennsylvania to be like, "I'm going to Alamogordo for Pistachio Land." You're going to Alamogordo for the White Sands, and
Right.
then you're going to go to Pistachio Land later. Like,
Right. Just in case you don't want you to forget that there's pistachio land here.
right. So, okay, I was talking about these kind of naming things and everything, right? And these like honor system
Hmm.
like deals, right?
A tier of importance,
Yeah,
national park, national monument,
yeah,
national
National Historic Site,
site.
Historical Park, right? There's all that kind of stuff. It's yeah, I mean everything is kind of below national park,
Hmm.
right? But there's other stuff too, not just the Department of the Interior, but of course UNESCO
Right.
does their thing, and UNESCO has a couple of sites in the US, but UNESCO also does these city designations. And that's really important for kind of our discussion today is these city designations from UNESCO. There are, to my knowledge, there are two cities of gastronomy in the US, and they are San Antonio and Tucson. So they are both within the Sun Belt.
Cities of gastronomy.
Yeah, cities of
Hmm.
gastronomy.
Oh,
San Antonio and Tucson,
uh-huh.
right? So, and from what I've read about it, it's not just, oh, they have good food, which they both certainly do,
Yeah.
but it's kind of also like they honor the way that food sourcing is done into the city. And it's like the whole process and not just the what you get on your plate at the end,
Right.
from what I recall. Again, that's just me speaking off the cuff. I will try and remember to include some links to UNESCO stuff in our description here. But anyways, I'll tell you that having lived in Tucson, it's certainly worthy of city of gastronomy, and having at least visited San Antonio and the River Walk and everything, is super, super famous. It is also definitely worthy of the designation city of gastronomy. And but then there's two others. So there's cities of literature in the U.S. You've got Iowa City, which is seems kind of random, but University of Iowa's there, and so I guess they just have like a really strong library or something. And then also Seattle. Seattle, Washington is a city of literature,
Hmm.
a UNESCO site, right? So, and again, those are kind of similar to the national parks deal. It's different than like a UNESCO World Heritage site, which you see a lot of those all throughout the entire world, and that's a big thing for people to go see. I believe like Angkor Wat in Cambodia is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's
Right.
just those like ultra important cultural sites for the entire world. So, but a city of gastronomy designation is still something really important, and I know that that has pushed a lot of tourism in Tucson, and you see that designation come kind of right at the same time that the streetcar line comes back.
Right.
And then the streetcar services a lot of the touristy food areas in Tucson, right? So you see this push, but that's beneficial to people who are visiting, of course, you can come to town and take public transit around town and go to restaurants, but that is beneficial to locals as well. So I feel like there's kind of this negative stipulation about tourism that it's really bad for the people who live in the city and that the people who visit are the only people who benefit from like tourism efforts.
Right. It's interesting because I think about, especially in city gastronomy, there's a lot of restaurants down towards the south end on 6th Avenue and 12th Avenue.
Big time,
And
especially 12. Yeah.
yeah, and they are, there's the Norte Sur transit line, basically, that's being planned
Yeah.
to run to the airport down, I believe, 6th. Or is it?
Oh, I forget it, but I
Yeah,
think it's six.
it's in that general vicinity. And it's been a point of contention because people are afraid because they're wanting to push for potentially a streetcar or bus rapid transit dedicated transit lanes, and a lot of people are really worried that it will um, negatively impact the neighborhoods around it because of the prices.
Right.
Basically, transit. I mean, I think that their concern is founded on in the past, a lot of areas in cities that have gotten light rail and transit have the prices have gone up and
Of
it's
course.
affected them negatively, right? So that's something to really think about when you're thinking about tourism in the city of gastronomy,
Hmm.
and also like uh, tourism amenities like transit or something.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So, yeah, kind of the thing to point out with that is what you're getting at is that transit is often not just made for the the use itself. It's made to create a means of development and that you have a transit corridor and then it brings in development, right? And that's what can cause these kinds of jumps in housing prices, I guess. It
Mm,
becomes a very desirable area and then you see a lot of businesses and, other just things going in, right? It becomes a highly invested in area and unfortunately that drives prices up. Not all
yeah,
the time necessarily, but it certainly seems to be a frequent thing. And there are ways to combat that with like, property tax strategies and everything, which are a little bit beyond the scope of our discussion because I don't want to get too like financial on the podcast. I just kind of want to talk more theory things,
sure,
but there are ways to combat it. It's just a really difficult problem that has been rising. And it's like this kind of mental struggle of like, okay, we want to clean up an area, make it better, invest in an area, whatever, right? Make housing look nicer, bring more businesses to the area, bring more transit options to the area to help people. And you want to do all those things, but then it's like, okay, if you do anything, it's going to gentrify an area and it's going to push people out. So it's like, do you just do nothing and let an area continue to decay? Or if you do like literally anything, is it going to just displace everybody? You know, is it like an all or nothing type deal? Or can you somehow bring these amenities to people without pushing them out?
well, yeah, there's going to be things in place to keep it from gentrifying. Well, actually, I like to think about things in terms of displacement. Neighborhoods change, over time, but really the thing that you're really trying to avoid is displacing the people that live there already
Yeah.
through rising prices or other things. So I mean, part of it goes back to like the housing crisis. There's just a lack of affordable housing and a lack of housing in general,
Yeah.
right? So that's a huge driver, I think, of displacement.
Right.
But also just the prices of things have gone up everywhere. Even
Yeah.
in Tucson, without things like putting transit in or making like light rail.
Right. Even without the transit investment,
Yeah, of
prices still go up. Um,
course
and
that's a
it's
world thing, but
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's an everywhere problem, but that means it's also a Sunbelt problem and
hmm
a Tucson, a Phoenix, a Vegas,
hmm
all those problems. But
yeah, Vegas especially.
well, yeah, and to get to that with the tourism stuff, obviously with Vegas, a city that I don't have much experience with, but what I just see a lot being an avid I'm an avid sports guy. He's not. But seeing kind of all this change that Vegas is undergoing with acquiring all these sports teams very suddenly.
Mhm.
In 2017 for the 17-18 season, Vegas got their first team. They expanded. Well, they had a AAA baseball team. They have one, a minor league baseball team. So that means, right? But they got their first of the four major American sports, right? Hockey, basketball, football, baseball. They got the Vegas Golden Knights in 2017, 17-18 season.
Mhm.
Their first year they went to the Stanley Cup, right? So they were immediately really good. And they were pretty much always like a heavy playoff contender. I think they've only missed the playoffs one season. And then this past year, they won the Stanley Cup,
Mhm.
right? So they have always been good. It's just, it's been a really interesting case study sports wise. But then you have them coming in 2017, 18, and then I get mixed in with because of the pandemic blurred time, but I think it's what 2020 and 2021 the Raiders
Mhm.
moved from Oakland to Vegas, and now the whole deal with the baseball team, the
Mhm.
Oakland A's
Mhm.
are they own land. They're like going to develop land in Vegas for their stadium. So Vegas within 5, 6, 7 years is going to go from having no teams to three,
Yep.
right? And then the NBA has been, I always hear rumors about the NBA talking about expansion, and you always hear cities brought up like Salt Lake or Vegas and it's just a lot of these Western cities are starting to get a lot more of this investment. And so not only is Vegas already a humongous tourist destination for its fame with the casinos and whatever, right?
Mhm.
But now you've also got these major sports teams. And so it's just more reason for tourism.
Right. And I think a lot of I think a lot of the tourists are coming from, I think a bulk, having being from Vegas and having worked in the tourism industry and casinos in Vegas as a teenager, um, most people are coming from Los Angeles, and they've been talking about the train from LA to Vegas.
Hmm.
And I think that people in LA are getting used to the idea of using transit for things like going on trips. And also, the stadium that they just built is on the south end of the strip. So
Right.
you can pretty much drive from LA to Vegas and not have to drive through the city, and you're at the stadium. So it makes sense that to have transit, like the train, because I was thinking about like people getting to Vegas, especially from Southern California, because when you drive that thing, on the weekend, Friday night, you're bumper to bumper from on the 15,
Yeah, yeah.
and then
What's that,
Sunday
like 4 hours, 4.5? Like without traffic.
without traffic. I mean, yeah, it can be fast. It can be like around 4 hours, give or take. But but yeah, but I have done the drive between Vegas and LA because I lived in LA and I go to Vegas to visit family or
Right.
go out. And yeah, if you're basically following the times, Friday night, Sunday afternoon, you're really sitting in traffic and it can take a long time. And there's been many times where I've been stuck, and I think that people would really embraced using a train because then they
Yeah.
could get to the stadium. And then if they have robust transit from the stadium to the hotel, they have a monorail,
Yeah.
right? And it goes to some spots, but I don't know how practical it really is. But
Right.
um,
It's great when you can take transit to a stadium. It's
yeah,
it's something that you don't experience in too many cities, but
yeah,
being able to do that is really really something. And
yeah.
I'll tell you, one of the places that I experienced that probably the best in memory is Chicago.
Mhm.
To both the Cubs and to the White Sox, there's transit that takes you right there. And fun fact, I recently went to the White Sox within the past year or so, and I went to the Cubs when I was a kid, but when I went to my White Sox game, I bought tickets online and then they sent me an email. And in the email, they actually had explicitly written a statement about them saying, like, please take public transit to
Mhm.
this game. Please do not drive. They have a parking lot, but they like were heavily encouraging of everybody taking transit because the driving it's the White Sox Stadium is in the quote South Side, like it's just kind of south of
Oh,
downtown.
yeah,
I've had Chicagoans tell me that's like the touristy South Side, and that's not really the South Side, but
the
type of deal.
touristy South Side.
Yeah, but so it's like just kind of south of Central Chicago, and so driving there, I mean, it's got to be awful. I didn't experience it, thankfully,
Mm,
but they have a parking lot. It's fairly large, but they are very, very encouraging of people using transit to get to those games, and it's a great experience. And I do take transit all the
mhm,
time in Philadelphia down to games because though the stadiums, and this is what kind of I'm thinking with Vegas,
mhm.
the stadiums in Philly are all in the very south end of the city,
Okay,
and they're all in this big complex that is like the most ginormous parking lot ever because there's like a casino there. There's a like hangout bar area, and then you have the stadium where the Flyers and the Sixers play. Then you have the stadium where the Eagles play, and then you have where the Phillies play, right?
right,
So there's three stadiums, a casino, and like a big bar, right? Like it's a ginormous complex, and it's so car centric there because it's meant for people from the suburbs to come out,
right,
right? And that's what I did when I was a kid. My dad would take me there from the suburbs and we would
right.
drive and park, right? And but then the rest of Philadelphia looks nothing like that, right? But there's just this area way at the bottom of the city that looks like that.
Mm,
However, you have that, all that giant parking and stuff, but the subway ends right there,
huh,
So you can, when I stay in the city now, you can take transit to the game. It's
yeah,
the Broad Street line. I think it's called NRG now, but it's Pattison Avenue.
okay,
But it's called it's like some sponsored crap now, but
okay,
it's Pattison at the end of the line. It's the very end of the Broad Street line, and you can just take that all the way up to City Hall, and then you can even get out to the suburbs via a commuter train that way. So you don't have to drive, but they still have this giant parking lot. So, Vegas, I know that me and you've talked a little bit about the stadiums and stuff and how it's just this like crazy huge parking lot and everything, but it's like even with that, you can still provide people transit to get to the game.
yeah. I wonder because I know I've taken the mega bus a lot to Vegas from LA, and it goes on the freeway too, so you're on the
Yeah.
bus stuck in traffic as well,
Yep.
which is no good. Um,
Yeah, that's its own episode
but
right there.
right, but so anyway, but it takes you to the south end of the strip, and which is close to the stadium. But I don't
Yeah.
know, I'm sure maybe they have a bus that goes directly to the stadium now. I'm not
Or
sure,
a shuttle from there
or
or
a
something.
shuttle. It's
Yeah.
possible because it's a transit center kind of out there at the bottom.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then Detroit has all their stadiums downtown,
Hmm.
right in the center of Detroit.
Hmm.
So really neat. And then they recently brought back their streetcar too,
Wow.
The Q line. And that's even, back to our discussion about um, transit being meant for development and everything. The Q line is really short. It's only
Hmm.
like 3 miles or something. And the streetcar in Tucson is only about four, I believe. So you have these very short lines that just create these booms around them, though. I mean,
Hmm.
when I visited Detroit, the downtown area is just, it doesn't, when you think of Detroit, you probably think of a dilapidated Midwestern city, but the downtown area has just taken off. And I think that you're foolish to think that that is not at all responsible with the Q line.
Hmm.
You bring back that streetcar line, that definitely is going to help revitalize an area. And you've just seen these areas around Tucson where the streetcar is just changed so much in the past 10 years.
Yeah, here in Tucson. Yeah, it's changed a lot for sure.
So, yeah, that's some cool stuff about tourism, right? Some cool places we've been. I know we've mentioned a few things, but
Southwest,
yeah, Southwest, but a little Midwest,
little Midwest.
little bit about me talking about back home in Philly as usual.
Well, actually, I was in Kansas City last week.
Yeah,
They're extending their streetcar south, and they're building a stadium on their streetcar line.
there you go. I believe, I don't know if this is, I don't know where this is
Or
at
Atlanta.
in the plans, and I may have mentioned this before on the show already, I think, but the streetcar line in Phoenix going out to Glendale
Uh-huh.
to State Farm Stadium where the Cardinals play,
Uh-huh.
because there are other teams, not counting the Coyotes. That's a mess. That's its own thing.
Uh-huh.
Not counting the Coyotes, but the Diamondbacks and the Suns play downtown, right in the center of Phoenix, right along a streetcar line. But then the Cardinals are out in Glendale, way west Phoenix, right? And so, and that's a nightmare to drive to.
Huh.
I have done that before. That's a nightmare to go to. But they are, I believe, or they at least want to extend the streetcar all the way out there.
Huh.
So
Think
pretty cool if it'll go from Mesa all the way to Glendale.
that's good. Yeah. Do it. Get that line and get the other line. I've been looking at some of the areas. There's the downtown areas when they're building. I've seen they've been replacing um, strip malls and parking lots with 511s. Seems to
Yeah,
be a thing that's happening there.
yeah,
So you're
yeah.
seeing it along the line, and it's kind of expanding outward beyond the central core.
Hmm.
But it's gonna be a matter of time before that happens.
Right. And then my thing too with that is that when you make the public transit experience part of like the game experience,
Hmm.
which typically, you're people who are going to sports games or concerts. I know
Hmm.
I always use sports because that's what
Hmm.
I go to, but concerts are also at all these stadiums, right?
Hmm.
When you make that a part of the experience, you are showing so many people what it can be like.
Yeah.
You are so many people are getting that exposure to that like, oh, it's really awesome that I can take a train from LA to Vegas to go to a Raiders game or something, or go to whatever concert in Vegas. Therefore we need more trains for other destinations. It's just I feel like it's just gonna help snowball the desire to have more trains and transit in the US, is by connecting major destination things that tourists from way outside of the city, but also tourists who come from the suburbs, are going to get to experience.
Yeah. And you've got to start somewhere because you can't just be like, well, nobody's going to use it. But then you're like, well, because you haven't, it's all very theoretical at that point.
Yeah.
I think that if it's convenient and easy to use, well, because, well, mainly we just subsidize and we incentivize driving so much.
Hmm.
But it's really about the choices that we make. And we really have to think about those choices in terms of the whole picture, right? We're talking about things like including the climate crisis
Yeah.
or economic crisis, or like the idea that people are driving less than they used to, or that cars are expensive.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. There's all that stuff that goes into it. And that's a big thing too, though, what you're talking about with the ease of use. If we're talking about tourism,
mhm.
right, and tourists experiencing a transit system, as someone from the Northeast with a lot of transit experience, the New York subway is still like outrageously complex to me. And I'm like, I don't know about this thing. you know,
Oh yeah, yeah. But you can get just about anywhere though. That's the
you
amazing part
can.
of it.
It's a beautiful part, but the thing is that it is not easy to figure out,
Yeah.
and well, Philadelphia's subways are so easy. It's you have a north south and an east west
Hmm.
line,
Hmm.
and they intersect at like City Hall. Like that's super
Yeah.
easy, right? Whereas New York's is just all over the place to me. But um, so I have a solid amount of transit experience, but then and that's just the subways in Philly. There's other train lines that go all over the place, but the subways are easy. So anyway, for someone who has only ever like lived in like a far flung suburb, like an exurb, and didn't go to college in like a walkable college town or something, or in a big city, right? For someone who has like only ever experienced like car centric exurban life, and then they want to go to like a Cubs game
Hmm.
if they visit Chicago, right? You got to make sure that like that person, like that's who you got to plan it for, that person can figure out your transit system.
Yeah. Yeah.
The person who has zero experience, or even further, better example, someone who doesn't speak English
There
and
you
someone
go.
who's visiting from a different country.
Yeah.
Because people come from different countries to go to places like Wrigley Field. and Fenway Park because they are old as crap and they are historic and they are very, very American. And so that draws in that tourism. So you got to make sure that these people can get around because if you're coming in from Europe, you don't got a car unless you rent one. But,
Right.
if you're like staying in Boston or Chicago, like don't get a car, take the train, but make sure that on the city planner's perspective, make sure that they can get around. So yeah, I know we talked a lot about big events and kind of planning for big events, but just having tourism be centered around like your city's marquee thing, right? If that's being a city of gastronomy here in Tucson, I feel like that's kind of our biggest driver, other than like natural landscapes and maybe the U of A a little bit, the university.
Yeah.
If you're like really into college sports or whatever, or just if you're visiting the school for school purposes. But so, it's kind of lacking here. There's not like a huge, like, oh, yeah, you have to go to Tucson and see this. Like, there's definitely stuff, but I feel like it's a little harder to get people to come here than to somewhere like Vegas or to somewhere like even
Yeah.
LA or New York, of course, right? Tucson's kind of in the shadows, but we do have our little claim to fame, and everywhere's kind of got their claim to fame. And so you can plan your tourism around that and understand what kind of demographics you're going to bring in.
Right. That's huge.
Yeah, so we're already at like 32 minutes.
Okay.
We've been yapping a lot. So, yeah, I mean, I really like to talk about tourism. We will probably talk more about tourism another
Yeah.
time because there's a lot more to go into.
So many different
And
levels.
there's so many different towns and the way that they're designed for things. It's just so fascinating. And thinking about being a tourist there, but also living there and kind of comparing and contrasting those two things. I think about that a lot when I'm traveling. So, yeah, maybe you'll start thinking that way too.
Okay.
So, with that, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.